Friends, welcome to this episode of Leadosophy. This is an addendum to my last episode, episode 54, where we talked about the likability factor of a leader. How important is it? We dove into that issue of likability. I think we kind of pulled it apart and was able to maybe understand that issue of likability and how much it plays a factor in leadership. Today's is just an add-on. Again, it's an addendum. I have a graph I want to show and would really love to get your feedback on it to see if it makes sense, number one. Number two, how accurate might it be? So hope you're here with an open mind, because that's the rule, not the exception. Today we're going to be talking about the infographic of likability and technical competence. Hope you enjoy it. Here we go.
Are you ready to permanently fuse leadership and philosophy? Then a word of caution. You are about to enter the fully abstract yet wholly concrete realm of Leadosophy. Our ideas are not always so clear and distinct. To validate this proposition, we welcome the host of Leadosophy, Tim Woody.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Leadosophy. Today we're going to be graphing leadership. That's what this is about. Have an infographic up on the screen. If you are watching, you can see it. If you are listening, I'll do my best to walk us through it, kind of talk about the visuals, mainly the graphic, try to explain it the best I can. But there'll be some reading in here too as well. The last episode, I talked about the likability factor of a leader. How important is it to a leader's effectiveness? And again, everyone might define effectiveness or leader effectiveness a little differently. I've talked about this on other shows, how a leader's effectiveness may vary based on the context the leader is in, the situation that person is in, who he or she is surrounded by, the organization or business that person is in. So effectiveness takes many forms. But we did discuss likability, and I think we came to the conclusion, or Leadosophy's analysis was, likability does play a pretty decent factor in leadership effectiveness, just effectiveness in the general terms. So in today's episode, the infographic I have it's titled Graphing Leadership. Subtitle is Leaders Who Are Highly Competent and Highly Likable Are the Exception and Not the Rule. So I'm blending this idea of a leader's likability factor with another area that I talk about frequently, which is technical competence or craft competence. How good is the leader at his or her job? And as well, how much do they know other people around them, their jobs, and what's going on, whatever business they might be in. So craft competence and likability, we're going to graph those two different ideas on this infographic. So number one, the first point I want to make is that likability plays a major factor in how followers perceive leaders. We talked about that on the last episode. I referenced a Harvard Business Review article. I linked it in the show notes on the last episode. It's linked in this infographic as well. But research shows that a leader's effectiveness is closely linked to the likability factor. Again, that was kind of the summary of the last episode. And the reference for that Harvard Business Review article is below this infographic. Point number two, we're going into craft competence. Leaders can survive, maybe even thrive, without knowing their job well. But for how long? That's one of my questions. And that's not a rhetorical question. I really don't know the answer. I think it varies based on person, based on job they're in. Some people can probably thrive for entire careers being low on the technical competence or craft competence scale. But research shows that a worker's well-being is closely linked to how that worker perceives their boss's craft competence. And again, that is a scholarly article that I have linked on the bottom of this infographic. You can check it out if you want. The studies show, and from their research, that how a worker thrives in the workplace or their well-being is very much tied or coupled to how they perceive their boss's technical competence. So here we have two different ideas, right? We have craft competence, which obviously plays a factor in likability or well-being of the followers. And then the likability itself, whether that's personality traits, whether that's how empathetic a leader is, maybe political savviness, and we're going to get into that a little bit on the discussion side. You have these two different areas, and I think they can converge. I think they both play a role together. How much they factor into the overall leadership formula, I'm not completely sure, but Leadosophy believes that technical competence or craft competence and the likability factor play a major role in leader effectiveness. So for discussion for this brief addendum to the last episode, Leadosophy asks or talks about this below graph that I created. And the below graph proposes that leaders who are highly likable and highly competent in their respectable professions are outliers. They're the exception, the far exception potentially. They are rare and they are highly desired. Most leaders probably fall somewhere in the middle of the graph, but this is an assumption that welcomes differing viewpoints. And before I continue, let me see if I can explain this graph if you're listening and not watching. I have a square, and on the left side of the square is a y-axis that runs up and down. It runs vertical. And on the very bottom of the y-axis on the left side is low, and on the very top is high. And this is the likability scale. So on the very bottom corner of the left-hand corner of the square, low likability running vertical on the y-axis to high likability at the top. On the x-axis running horizontally is craft competence. And the very low side on the left is low, running left to right. On the right side is high. So we have craft confidence that moves from low to high, likability that moves low to high. So on the very bottom left hand of the square, we have what I call the undesirable leaders. They are low likability factor and low competence and craft. So plainly put, they don't know their job very well, and they may have just a terrible personality. Nobody likes this person. They can't get along with anybody. They don't listen. They have terrible communication skills. Whatever it may be, this leader is not liked at all or liked very little, and they are low in the craft competency side. So those are what I call the undesirable leaders. So I'm going to go back up and read what I've talked about. Hopefully you have the visual of the leadership graph. So continue on. Again, most leaders probably fall somewhere in the middle of the graph. So somewhere in the middle would be kind of medium likability, medium technical competence. If you can visualize that. Again, this is an assumption, and the spirit of Leadosophy is I highly encourage you to push back on that assumption. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. But how many leaders are high in likability but low in craft competence? So have you ever worked for somebody who is super likable, got a very agreeable personality, but they just do not know their job at all? And then flip that around. Have you ever worked for somebody, or do you know somebody who is very good at their job? They know their job inside and out. They are probably one of the most they're probably the biggest subject matter expert that you may find in their field. But you cannot get along with this person. Again, they don't have an agreeable personality. Maybe they have terrible communication skills. Have you ever seen anyone like that? Have you ever worked for anyone like that? It is rare that leaders can please everyone at all times. And this is for a ton of different reasons. High likability may be more difficult to achieve than high craft competence. What do you think about that? And then contrary to that point, my wife actually kind of brought this up. She said instead of high likability being more difficult to achieve than craft competence, she flipped it around. She said that some may argue that it's much easier for a leader to mask their lack of craft competence solely because they are pleasant, or this person is agreeable, or maybe they're a gifted rhetorician. They have the smooth talking ability. Maybe they're politically savvy, maybe really good with empathy, or even they're easygoing. So if a leader has one or all of these qualities, empathetic, easygoing, smooth talker, great communication skills, maybe they can mask their lack of competence in craft. As some might say, maybe they can fake it until they make it. So finally, Leadosophy proposes the leader who falls on the low side of both craft competence and likability will be perceived as an undesirable leader. So the very bottom left-hand side of the square, your undesirable leaders, moving up through the middle of the square towards the top right. On the very top right quadrant of this square, we have the leader outliers. I call these leaders very rare. Not only are they super technically competent in their position, but they also have a high likability factor. So again, I don't know if I described this graph very well for my listeners. If I didn't, I apologize. I'll link this graph to the show notes. Check it out if you get a chance. Drop me a line. Would love to know your thoughts on the likability factor and the technical competence factor and how they play a role in leadership effectiveness overall. I really appreciate you watching this episode. Remember, Leadosophy is about using the tools of philosophical thought to deepen our understanding of leadership and of life. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for watching and listening to another episode of Leadosophy. If you liked what you heard today, hit that subscribe button and check out Leadosophy.com and learn more about Tim's ideas on philosophy and leadership. We'll see you next time.